La foto todavía tiene el viejo logo detrás, estamos lanzando el nuevo logo, pero aquí no está todavía. Bueno, thank you very much for the invitation, Marta. Thank you very much, Rafael, for being here, and not only being here. We are, as you know, supporting this first summit as Iberia Express, and also on behalf of our partners, British Airways and American Airlines, for a very simple reason. We do believe in the role that travel agencies play and will play in the future, because what our vision is managing customer experience and not transporting simply people from A to B. And there are very relevant customer segments where travel agencies play an essential role in creating that customer experience. So as simple as that, we are here also to testimony that we do believe in this summit and in the future, even though in different forms certainly, because evolution happens in the sector. It touches us very, very clearly as it touches you. But in new forms, we will be part of creating the customer experience of the future. Said so, why is that so relevant, that viability? I think, and sustainability. I think that what is happening right now to Iberia is, as Mark was saying, what is sustainability is basically long-term viability. Iberia risks to die. And so what we are dealing with at the moment is transforming profoundly the company to ensure its long-term viability and therefore its positive impact to society in broader sense. So our clients, our customers, all the stakeholders, which include the travel agencies in the industry, because at the end, anything that we do that doesn't have that long-term sustainability will simply disappear. And in that sense, going beyond Iberia and looking at the role that the airline industry plays in terms of sustainability, you can see that on one side, the airline industry represents 57 million people working, employees, represents, not very significant, as you know, creation of wealth. That is a paradox in the sense that in the past 20 years, in terms of wealth creation, the airline industry has had its ups and downs, but struggled to be not very profitable. But for most, what it does is that it transports every day 8 million people and ensures the mobility throughout the planet of then 2.4 billion people on a yearly basis. And that number is expected, according to what was shared before, is expected to grow at a very high pace. We expect to reach to 3.6 billion in the coming years, in the coming 3 years, so with an increase of 600 million additional people moved by the airline industry. Now, at the same time, the airline industry has an impact on the environment. So clearly, you see the two angles of the sustainability of the airline industry. On one side, it is a motor, an engine of mobility of people and therefore, and of employees, and therefore it is an engine of development of economy. At the same time, it impacts environment. How does it do it? Because it's very visible, and in the past years it has also been very much debated, especially in Northern Europe. I have to say that there is, in this respect, a visibility of the issue that differs in the different countries. But the actual numbers are as follows. The airline industry contributes to 2% of the CO2 emissions. So you could come to the conclusion that it's pretty marginal. At the same time, 2% of the CO2 emission is still a huge number, and especially with the growth rate that we project, as I just mentioned, moving from 2.5 billion people traveling to 3.6 and all the growth rates expected, clearly that weight in CO2 emissions has a risk of increasing. And therefore, the airline industry as a whole started taking the responsibility of saying, we need to ensure by 2020 that CO2 emissions will stop growing. And we need to make sure that by 2050, the CO2 emissions that were made in 2005 will be reduced by 50%. So these are the big, large numbers about what the airline industry is committed to doing in the future. And how does it do it? It does it mainly through 4 leverages. The first one is innovation. The second one is operational measures. The third one is the infrastructure and the sky system. I will talk about it a bit. And the fourth one is economic incentives to reduce as much as possible emissions. The first one is the most visible, intuitive one, and is the one of new fleet, new engines, new technology, therefore, used to reduce the impact. And when we talk about the impact, it's not only the emissions, we talk also about the noise. Just a number, I mean, in the last 20 years, the emissions have reduced through the new technologies by 75%, but still leads to the number that I mentioned before. And therefore, buying the new planes, so I can mention the renovation that currently we are taking at Iberia as an example. We're just introducing now the new 8 A330s. It has an impact of 20% of fuel consumption and CO2 emissions compared to the older technology. Technology also has to do with the biofuel. That I have to say is a less concrete today impact because in fact biofuels are just in the phase of being tested. There was, for instance, a participation with AENA of Iberia recently in a test providing biofuel from microalgae. So there are very innovative ways to produce biofuel. And there are tests, for instance, with Repsol as well in Spain to produce biofuel. This is another angle of technology that in the coming years should allow the airline industry to reduce emissions. The second angle that I was saying was the one of operational measures. And there are some nice examples. They are not that intuitive. I mean, you just imagine, for instance, the trolleys that we have on board. Or imagine the water that we carry to serve passengers. They have a huge impact because they generate weight. And fuel goes with weight. So there are huge studies that are undertaken at the moment, for instance, to transform trolleys. I mean, you would imagine that is the least advanced technology component we have on board, but to reduce 35% of the weight of the trolleys, and then that has a huge impact on fuel consumptions and CO2 emissions. Or exactly measuring how much water we should carry. Because in fact, if you sneak into the galley at the end of the journey, you would see that there is a lot of spare material that remains. And optimizing the usage of that material not only is a way to reduce the cost of that specifically, but also to reduce the weight and therefore the fuel consumption. There are also systems, and here I'm not going too much into the technicism of that, but there are systems like, for instance, ACARs. These are technologies that airlines use to measure much more precisely the consumption on a real-time basis. So it is not anymore like a car that you see just the angle how much fuel is remained, but there is a real-time connection between the airline and basically the headquarters, where there is a real-time recalculation every second of what is the actual consumption, what is your profile of flighting for the remaining of the flight, and therefore how you can adjust speed, altitude to optimize consumption of fuel. So the second angle, operational measures that airline can take to reduce emissions. The third one is very simple, is that we are, for instance, Europe, but still every country manages his own sky on its own. And this is an unbelievable waste. There is a calculation that has been made that if the sky in Europe would be managed as one, we would achieve a 5 billion euro savings on fuel. Now, the total IATA profitability for 2013 is 2.2 billion US dollars. So you can see the relative size of one single measure that would be not generating any sacrifice, simply optimizing on a European basis the usage of sky, that will lead to 5 billion savings in fuel consumption for the industry and for the countries. The last one is one that has been debated a lot in the past months, which is economic incentives. Let me be clear, airlines, at least the airlines I do represent, and most of the airlines in IATA, do support the concept of emission trading schemes, because they are positive incentives to reduce as much as possible emissions, and also to basically reward the most efficient operators and to penalize the least efficient operators. So it is a healthy system, but at one condition, that it applies to all in the same manner. It cannot be that due to that you generate distortions in competition, because that would affect sustainability, because then you would have the paradox that the airlines that would survive would be the ones not affected by the emission trading schemes, so not having to reduce their emissions, but being not part, for instance, of a geographical area where these emission schemes are applied. So there, what we advocate is that any economic measures that would be applied on a level playing field, the same for everybody. So in synthesis, we do believe that aviation plays a key role for sustainability, both in growth but also in respecting the environment. And I personally believe that Iberia will be a key player in that respect. We are building a new Iberia that is able to be viable, sustainable in the long run, and to live as much 85 years it lived in the past, 85 years and more in the future. Thank you very much.